Chapter 1. The child beneath two suns, hear me, through the dust of ages. Hear me, I am the voice that lingers beyond the end. I have no breath, yet I speak. I have no eyes, yet I see. I am bound within crystal and code, an echo given shape, only by memory. I speak now of the boy who bore the weight of suns, and of the shadow that followed him across the stars. Tatooine, a wound in the galaxy, baked in twin fire. One sun to scorch the skin, the other to bleach the bones. Sand stretches here like a sea without end, and in it, the bones of forgotten beasts lie half buried, their teeth still glinting in the light. The wind does not sing, it hisses, and it whispers, and it eats away the edges of all things. Here, life is bought and sold. Souls are weighed like metal scraps. The weak bow, the strong take, and the force. Oh, the force coils in silence. Watching, it was here, in the shadow of vaporators and slave markets, that the chosen one took his first steps, Anakin Skywalker. The name was not yet heavy, not yet dreaded. It belonged to a boy no taller than a moisture barrel, whose eyes were far older than his years. They were the color of storm-touched seas, restless, untamed, forever looking toward horizons he could not reach. His hands knew the language of machines, as if he had been born with it. Scrap and junk obeyed him, reshaping themselves into speeders that could fly and droids that could serve. He was property, owned his mother. Two bore the mark of another's claim, the invisible shackle, the price tag that reduced her to labor and silence. Yet in their small room above the shop of Watto the Toitarian, there was warmth. It was the warmth of whispered goodnights, of shared bread, of dreams spoken in the dark where no master could hear. The galaxy would one day call him dangerous, but in those first years his danger was this: he dreamed and the Force listened. Even then it flowed through him as through no other, not as a gentle stream, but as a river in flood, bending toward destiny. When he raced his pod racer through the canyons, the wind was his ally, the machines sang to him. The turns of the course bent themselves just enough to let him pass. The other children saw a slave boy who should have known fear. What they could not see was that the Force itself tilted toward him yet. There was another presence that tilted toward him as well, far away, in chambers of power where the light was worshipped but not understood. Whispers of prophecy stirred, and deeper still, in the cold, unlit places where the dark waits without. Breathing something shifted. The Sith, though unseen, had marked him as their own, but he did not know this. On the surface of Tatooine, the boy lived only in the space between the suns. By day, he worked the cluttered shop, repairing broken parts for travelers who would never remember his face. By night, he knelt beside his mother, listening to the distant hum of vaporators, the smell of metal, dust, and desert wind in his hair. Built to escape, machines were his way of touching the future. One day, that future walked into his life in the form of a tall man with a beard and eyes that seemed to see through walls, and a woman whose bearing was regal even in plain clothes. They came not as traders, but as seekers. They carried the hum of the Jedi about them, though the boy did not yet know the word Qui-Gon Jinn. His presence was a deep current beneath the surface of the Force, steady and unyielding. The boy did not fear him. He recognized him, though they had never met. The recognition was not of face, but of thread, the unseen cord that binds lives. Together before they ever speak, the Jedi saw in the boy what others did not just talent, not just quickness, but a vergence, a place where the Force pulls and overflows, bending time and possibility around it. Qui-Gon's gaze lingered on him in a way no free man ever looked at a slave, and so the test began. A simple thing. Perhaps, in the telling the boy's reflexes, his knowing without knowing, his unshaken nerve when others faltered. But in the language of the Force, it was thunder. The boy laughed in those moments, unaware of what his laughter cost, for in that sound, bright and unguarded, the currents of the galaxy shifted. The dark took note. The wheel of prophecy began. To turn again, Qui-Gon wagered for the boy's freedom, not with coins, but with destiny. The race that would decide his fate was a blur of speed and heat, of metal screaming through canyon air. The padracer Anakin had built with his own hands became the spear point of his liberation. Victory came. The chain around his ankle broke, but one chain remained. His mother could not follow. It is here, in the quiet moment between freedom and departure, that the holocron lingers longest. For this is where the boy first learned the truth that would follow him into darkness, that freedom is never whole, and love always leaves a wound. He promised her he would come back. He promised, and so he stepped aboard the stranger's ship, carrying with him the desert's heat, the hum of his mother's voice, and the unspoken mark the Force had placed upon him. Above Tatooine, the stars stretched out like an open hand. Somewhere within them, the Jedi Temple waited, and beyond it, the shadow, the holocron, whispers this truth. The moment the ship left the gravity of that world, the boy's fate was sealed. The suns he left behind burned in his memory, one for the light that would claim him, and one for the dark that would never let go. The galaxy believed it had gained a savior. The dark knew it had found its heir. Chapter 2. The Hand of the Jedi here, again. The sands are behind us now, yet there. Dust still clings to his feet. Every step away from Tatooine was a step into the hollow mouth of prophecy. The boy, no longer bound by chains of iron, now felt the invisible cords of destiny tightening. Freedom had a taste, sharp and brief, and it faded quickly in the shadow of the strangers who had claimed him. The Jedi, keepers of the light, bound by codes older than many stars. To Anakin, they were figures from a storybook he had never read, wielders of blades made from sunlight, eyes that saw truths, hidden beneath the skin. Yet even in his wonder, there was a quiet disquiet, a knowing that their light burned not only to warm, but to judge. Qui-Gon Jinn walked ahead of him through the ship's narrow corridors, tall and deliberate, each step a choice. His presence was not the suffocating authority of a master on Tatooine. It was something deeper, quieter, like an old river that had carved canyons in silence. He did not speak of ownership. He spoke of the Force. It was here Anakin first heard the word in full, not as a rumor between traders, not as a fragment in a padracer's hangar, but as truth spoken by one who had given his life to it. The Force is what gives a Jedi his power. It surrounds us, penetrates us, binds the galaxy together. These words were a thread, tying Anakin's life to something vast. Yet the boy felt something else in the weave, a cold strand that hummed beneath the warmth. He did not name it, but the Force knew it. When they reached Coruscant, the city world, the boy's breath caught. There was no horizon, only towers climbing into the clouds, and beneath them, chasms that seemed to swallow light. The air tasted of metal and endless motion. Here, people were not bound by chains, yet they were bound by something harder to. See, the weight of the Republic's will. The temple rose like a mountain carved from time itself. White stone and high spires, yet not untouched by shadow. The halls were cool, filled with the quiet hum of lightsabers at rest and the silent gaze of statues that had watched centuries pass, and waiting within the council. They sat in a circle, as if to guard a flame, their eyes measuring not the boy's form but his essence. He felt them in his mind, brushing the edges of his thoughts like cold fingers through mist. Master Windu's gaze was unyielding, Master Yoda's deeper still, pools of ancient water, still on the surface, but with depths that pulled at the soul. They asked of his past, his feelings, his dreams. They spoke the prophecy aloud. The chosen one shall bring balance to the Force. The words filled the chamber like a low tolling bell. Then came the test. Shapes upon a screen. Questions, images that flickered like thoughts. To him, the answers came before the questions had finished, as if the Force itself whispered them directly into his mind. Yet when it was done, the air in the chamber was not filled with wonder, but unease. Yoda's voice was soft, but its weight pressed against the boy's chest. Clouded this boy's future is. Dangerous he is. Full of fear. The words struck deeper than Anakin understood. They saw it not as a wound to heal, but as a seed that could grow into something terrible. What they could not see, or would not admit, was that the seed had already sprouted, watered by loss, fed by love that could not let go. Qui-Gon stood for him, defied them, declared the boy must be trained, prophecy or no. But even Qui-Gon could not tear away the curtain that hung between Anakin and their acceptance. He was brought into the temple not as one of them, but as a question that had not yet been answered. The days that followed were both wonder and ache. The temple was a labyrinth of learning, halls where younglings moved in silent formations, gardens where the wind carried the scent of alien flowers, and chambers where lights blazed like captured lightning. Anakin learned quickly, faster than any his age. The Force moved through him like a current too strong for shallow waters, bending to his will even when he did not call it. His hands, so used to metal and gears, now learned the hilt of a training saber, the shape of Force meditation. But there were rules, so many rules, detached from possessions, detached from fear, detached from love. It was here, among the endless halls, that the first hairline fractures began. For the boy's heart still beat in time with the desert wind, still heard his mother's voice in dreams. They told him to let go, but to him, letting go was another word for losing. In the quiet of the training chambers, he began to notice the glances, the whispers when he passed. Not all Jedi trusted him. Some feared him. And somewhere, deep beyond the temple's walls, that fear was being fed by a mind that knew how to twist it into a weapon. In the highest spire of Coruscant's Senate district, a man in crimson robes watched the boys progress with patient interest. His name was already a shadow on the Republic, Palpatine. He moved like still water, calm on the surface, hiding the currents below. The boy would come to him in time, drawn by warmth that concealed the coldest truth. But for now, Anakin stood between worlds, 1 foot in the light where Qui-Gon's hand guided him, 1 foot still in the shadow of Tatooine, where love and loss had written their first lessons. The holocron remembers the day. The council gave their final word. The boy would be trained, but watched, guided, but doubted. He would walk the path of a Jedi with the weight of the prophecy at his back, and the suspicion of his masters in his shadow. And above them all, the Force watched, divided within itself. For in the light's embrace was a spark it could not hold, and in the dark's grasp was a flame it could not yet reach. The wheel had begun to turn. Listen closely. For it is here that the first root of darkness finds the soil it needs. It is here that the chosen one learns that destiny always takes more than it gives. The boy had left Tatooine, but Tatooine had not left him. Its heat still lived in his skin, its emptiness still hummed in his bones. In dreams, he still saw the curve of the twin suns dipping below the dunes, and the shadow of a figure standing in the doorway, waiting, always waiting. That figure was his mother, Shmi Skywalker. The Jedi taught him to center his mind, to let the river of the Force carry his thoughts away like leaves. They told him that attachment was a chain, and that to love too deeply was to invite fear. But they did not understand, or refused to understand, that to a boy born in slavery, love was not an ornament. It was the one thing that had made life worth enduring. Each meditation was a small act of rebellion. In the quiet, when his mind was meant to be empty, he would fill it with her, the warmth of her hands, the sound of her voice saying his name, the way she looked at him not as property, not as a tool, but as her child. But the Jedi did not speak of such bonds with tenderness. They spoke of them with warning. Master Yoda's words still echoed in him. Train yourself to let go of everything. You fear to lose. How could he? The wound of separation was still fresh, and it was not clean. There had been no true farewell, only a promise, fragile as breath, that he would return. The Council offered him new family in the form of the Jedi Order. But this family came with rules sharper than any blade. He was told where to go, how to feel, when to speak. His questions about why he could not visit her, why he could not send word, were met with silence, or with patient, unyielding lectures on detachment. In those silences, the seed was planted. It was small at first, just a whisper that the Jedi did not understand him, that their wisdom, though ancient, was not complete, that perhaps there was a greater truth the Order could not see, and the dark knew how to water such seeds. At times, he felt it like a shadow passing over the sun. It did not frighten him. It felt like something that knew his name before he spoke it. It offered no rules, only a quiet promise. I will not take from you what you love. Years passed, but the wound did not close. In every victory at the temple, every duel won, every lesson mastered, there was the hollow knowledge that none of it would be shared with the one who had believed in him first. Obi-1. Now his master noticed the boy's restlessness. His corrections were firm, his praise scarce. He trained Anakin as the code demanded, shaping him into a Jedi in skill, but not in heart. Where Qui-Gon had seen the boy's spirit as a river to be guided, Obi-Wan saw it as a fire to be contained, and the boy began to wonder if perhaps he was both a river and a fire, unstoppable and unquenchable. The holocron remembers the day. The wound was touched again. It came with a vision, unbidden, sudden and searing. In the quiet of the temple's gardens, as wind moved through the leaves, he saw her, his mother, surrounded by shadow, her breath shallow, her eyes pleading. The Force had opened a window, and through it he saw only suffering. When he told the Council, they did not move. They spoke of patience, of trust in the will of the Force. They told him visions were not always truth, that fear could shape them into lies. But the boy did not hear caution in their words. He heard dismissal, and the seed in him deepened its root. He resolved that if the Jedi would not help her, he would go himself. A Jedi must be selfless, they had told him. Yet they could not see that to save her was, to him, the truest form of selflessness. It was, in this fracture between his heart and their law, that the dark smiled. For every choice that leads to shadow begins not with hatred, but with love that has been cornered. The holocron's voice grows quiet here, for this truth is sharp. The boy's first steps toward the dark were not made in rage, but in devotion. The Jedi believed they were training him. In truth, they were sharpening the blade that would one day be turned against them, and far away, beyond the temple walls, a man in crimson robes listened to whispers the Jedi could not hear. He heard of the boy's visions. He heard of the council's denial, and in his mind, the pieces of a great design began to fit more tightly together. The boy was still young, still raw, but in him was a power that would grow restless under chains. A power that could be made to believe that the chains of the Jedi were no different from the chains of slavery. The seed was planted. The roots had begun to spread. It would only take time and the right wound for the tree to bear its dark fruit. Chapter 4. The shifting shadows of Naboo come closer, for the galaxy's greatest tragedies are rarely born in battlefields alone. Sometimes they are woven in the quiet spaces between wars, in corridors of diplomacy, in whispered promises, in shadows that touch the heart before they touch the blade. Naboo, a world of green waters and silver cities, where the air carries the scent of blooming lakeside gardens, and the sun drapes itself across marble domes. To most, it is a place of peace, but the holocron remembers it as a turning point, a nexus where the light and dark brushed shoulders. Years had passed since the boy's departure from Tatooine. Anakin had grown into his Jedi robes, his once childish frame now sharpened by discipline, his hands as sure with a lightsaber as they had once been with a hydrospanner. Yet beneath the practiced calm, the same currents pulled at him, the ache of separation, the hunger for control over the fates of those he loved. It was under these currents that he was sent to Naboo. The official mission was simple: protection. The target, a senator whose life was threatened. The reality was something else entirely. Padma Amidala, the queen he had met as a boy, had shed her crown for the Senate's mantle. Yet to Anakin's eyes, she had not shed her radiance. The years had deepened it. Her presence was a thread back to the days when he had been no more than a slave child with a dream and a promise. The holocron speaks here with caution, for love is the most dangerous of the galaxy's forces, not because it is dark, but because it belongs to neither side. It is the current that ignores the borders between light and shadow, and so it can drown those who think themselves safe. Their reunion was not a storm at first. It was the quiet recognition of two souls who had once faced death together and survived. Yet in the quiet, bonds grow deeper than they should. Anakin spoke of his life since Tatooine, of the Jedi Temple, its beauty and its walls, of the victories and the silences. Padma listened, her eyes searching his face as though she could still see the boy beneath the man. And in return, she spoke of the Senate of politics that strangled justice, of compromises that tasted like betrayal. In these moments, she was not the untouchable senator. She was simply Padma, and in her voice, Anakin heard the same weariness he felt when the council spoke in riddles instead of answers. Danger lives in recognition. When two people see the same wound in each other, they can forget that some wounds must be left closed. But Naboo was not only a stage for quiet conversation. Shadows moved here, shadows that belonged to men who wore the face of guardians. Count Dooku's separatist cause had already set fire to the edges of the galaxy. The attempt on Padma's life was no lone act. It was part of a widening circle of fear and distrust, yet unseen by most. Another hand stirred these waters, the same crimson-robed figure who would watch Anakin from afar. Palpatine moved like a man of virtue, offering counsel to both Padman and the Jedi, yet every word he spoke was a thread, weaving the boy tighter into his web. In private, he praised Anakin's skill, his judgment, his instincts, speaking the approval. The counsel withheld. It is here the holocron lingers, for it knows the truth. Every master of manipulation first teaches their prey to doubt the authority they already serve. While Padme gave Anakin warmth, Palpatine gave him validation, and together these gifts became a net the Jedi could not cut. On Naboo, the days passed in calm, yet it was the dangerous kind of calm, like the still air before a monsoon. They walked through palace gardens, across sunlit balconies, speaking of worlds beyond duty. Anakin's laughter returned in small bursts, unburdened by the Council's watchful eyes. But in those same moments, the boundaries set by the Jedi grew thinner and thinner. The holocron remembers the exact moment the first line was crossed. It was in the quiet of the lakeside retreat, the water lapping gently at the shore. They spoke of the future, a future where the galaxy could be free of war, where the corruption of the Senate could be purged, where people like his mother would never be left in chains. It was a dream born from hope and from control. Anakin spoke of power as though it were a tool that could be wielded without cost. Padme, perhaps, thought his words were only idealism, but the holocron hears them for what they were, the first stirrings of the belief that only his will could bend the galaxy toward peace. And yet, beneath these shadows, the mission was completed. The danger to her life passed. The Jedi recalled them to Coruscant, but something had been left behind on Naboo, and something else taken away. What was left behind was the illusion that they could part easily. What was taken was the clarity of the Jedi's path. The Chosen One had now seen what life could be outside the temple's walls, and it was a vision he could not unsee. And the dark was patient. It did not need to strike yet. It only needed to watch, to wait, and to let love grow in the soil the Jedi refused to tend. The holocron's whisper lowers here, almost like a confession. It was not war that first set the Chosen One against the Jedi. It was the quiet betrayal of their refusal to understand his heart. From Naboo, they returned to Coruscant. But part of Anakin Skywalker remained on those shores, a part the Jedi could never retrieve, and a part the dark would one day claim. Chapter 5. The blade between master and apprentice here. This truth. The bond between master and apprentice is a double-edged blade. It can guard or it can cut, and in time, it always does both. Anakin Skywalker's days in the Jedi Order had become a pattern of brilliance and restraint. In the practice halls, his saber moved faster than thought, his leaps defied gravity, his mastery of the Force surpassed all of his peers. Yet for every praise that passed Obi-Wan Kenobi's lips, there came 2 words of caution. The holocron remembers Obi-Wan as a man of discipline, a keeper of rules, not because he feared chaos, but because he understood what it cost to rebuild order once it broke. To him, Anakin's skill was a river in flood, powerful, beautiful, but capable of tearing down everything if left unchecked. And so, Obi-Wan shaped himself into the dam. He corrected the boy's footwork when it was already flawless. He questioned his instincts when they had already saved lives. He reminded him, again and again, that patience was the path of the Jedi, but Anakin's patience had been spent long ago. In the dust of Tatooine, the missions they undertook together brought both bond and friction. On war-torn worlds, they fought, as one moving with an unspoken rhythm born of countless battles. There were moments when they were more than master and apprentice, more than friends. They were brothers. Yet, in the stillness after combat, the cracks showed. Anakin would speak of what could be done if they simply acted, if the Council would only trust his vision. Obi-Wan would answer with the teachings of the Code, words that tasted to Anakin like chains disguised as wisdom. The holocron marks this. As the slow forging of the second blade, the hidden edge turned inward. Trust eroded grain by grain, replaced not with hatred, but with something far more dangerous, the belief that his master would never truly understand him. Obi-Wan noticed the change. He saw the flashes of defiance in his apprentice's eyes, the way Anakin's jaw tightened when ordered to wait. But he told himself it was youth. Nothing more, a fire that time would cool. He did not see that it was a fire being stoked, not burned out. Palpatine saw. The Chancellor had woven himself into Anakin's life with all the subtlety of a shadow at sunset present. Inevitable, unremarkable, until the world was already dim. In private meetings, away from Jedi ears, he spoke of Anakin's greatness not as potential, but as certainty. He told him the galaxy needed more than patience. It needed decisive power. In these moments, Palpatine became what Obi-Wan could not be. The voice that told Anakin his instincts were not dangerous, but right, and yet the bond between master and apprentice did not snap. Not yet. It held, because, for all their differences, there was still trust on the battlefield. Anakin trusted Obi-Wan's back with his life. Obi-Wan trusted Anakin's saber to be where it was needed. But the Force does not only bind, it tests. And soon the test came. The holocron recalls a mission on a fractured outer rim world, its skies thick with smoke, its cities gutted by war. Their task was simple in name. Bring the last of the separatist warlords to justice. The battle was swift, brutal. At its heart stood the warlord himself, defiant, unarmed, defeated. Obi-Wan ordered that he be taken alive. Anakin hesitated, then struck him down. The silence after that act was heavier than the smoke around them. Obi-Wan's voice was not raised, but it was sharp as any blade. That was not justice. That was vengeance. Anakin said nothing, but inside, the second blade turned. To him, it had been necessary, an end to the bloodshed, a decisive close to the chapter. He did not see it as vengeance. He saw it as mercy to the galaxy. This difference between them was more than disagreement. It was the slow realization that they were not walking the same path, even when their steps matched. From that day, Obi-Wan watched him more closely, spoke his praise less often, and Anakin, in turn, spoke less of his thoughts, hiding the flame that grew brighter behind his eyes. The holocron warns. It is not hatred that breaks the bond between master and apprentice. It is silence. It is the distance grown in moments unspoken, wounds unacknowledged, trust unrenewed, and the dark waited in those silences, like water filling the space between cracked stones. In the temple, others began to notice. Some masters whispered that the boy's power was growing too fast. Others feared the prophecy itself, wondering if the balance it promised would come at the cost of their own order. Anakin felt every unspoken word. He carried them like weights on his shoulders. And when the Council gave him missions without Obi-Wan, it felt less like trust, and more like testing the leash. Palpatine's voice, in contrast, was steady. They are jealous of your power. They fear you because they cannot control you. One day you will have to choose between their rules and what you know is right. And so the blade between master and apprentice was drawn, though neither could yet see the cut it would make. The hot closes this chapter with a whisper. Every partnership ends in separation. The only question is whether it ends by choice or by the blade. Chapter 6. The Woman in the Shadows in the Archives of the Force. There are presences so bright they cast their own shadows. Padme Amidala was such a presence, and to Anakin Skywalker she was not shadow, but sanctuary. The holocron remembers her not as the galaxy knew her, senator, queen, diplomat, but as Anakin knew her in secret, a voice of compassion when the galaxy offered only orders, a face unmarked by the suspicion of the Jedi Council, a presence that quieted the storm within him. She was the one tether in his life that asked nothing of his power. With her, he was not chosen one, not general, not Padawan. He was simply Anakin. But even sanctuaries have cracks. Padme's place in his life was forbidden, a truth both of them wore like invisible chains. The Jedi Code did not allow attachments. Love was called possession. Possession was called the path to the dark side, and yet the heart does not care for codes. The holocron recalls the moments they stole from time itself, moonlit balconies on Coruscant, where they whispered about a future they could never name. Aloud, letters sent through droids, disguised as political briefings. Touches brief enough to avoid suspicion, yet carrying the weight of eternity to Anakin. She was proof that his life could be more than the will of the Council. To pardon, he was proof that the galaxy still held people willing to fight for more than power. But the galaxy was burning, and love is a fragile seed in fire. War took Anakin away again and again, throwing him into battles where death was constant. And victory meant nothing if she was not there to see it. Every time he returned, the gap between what he had seen and what she believed widened. For Padme believed in peace, not as a dream, but as a political reality she fought to shape with words and laws. Anakin believed in peace too, but his was forged by the saber, carved from the bones of those who threatened it. Still, they loved each other as if love alone could bind their two worlds. It was during this time that the shadow within Anakin began to grow in ways even he did not name. The Council's mistrust pressed down on him, Obi-Wan's caution dulled the warmth between them, and Palpatine's whispers curled around his mind like smoke. And then the visions began. The holocron describes them in fragments, palm pale and fading, lying upon a bed of silk, his hands reaching for her, but finding only air, her eyes closing, her breath slipping away, his voice breaking against the silence as she did not answer. The visions came again and again, uninvited, relentless. Each time they struck, Anakin woke with the weight of inevitability on his chest. He remembered his mother, the dreams of her suffering, the truth he found too late. He remembered how the Jedi had told him patience, and how patience had meant death. Now the Force spoke again, and it spoke of loss. The Jedi taught that the future was always in motion, that visions could mislead. But Anakin felt no uncertainty. The Force was not showing him possibility. It was showing him a wound yet to come. Palm noticed the change in him. He became more protective, more watchful. His eyes searched her as if looking for signs that the vision had already begun. His hands lingered when they touched, as if holding her a moment longer could anchor her to life. She asked what haunted him. He said nothing, because the words "you are going to die" would make the shadow real. But inside, he vowed, he would not lose her, not again, not like his mother, no matter what it took. The holocron marks this vow as a hinge of fate, for vows made in fear are never kept without cost, and Palpatine, patient serpent, was waiting. When Anakin confided in him, the Chancellor did not dismiss the visions as the Council might. He listened, he nodded, and then, with careful poison, he spoke of ancient Sith knowledge, of powers lost to the Jedi, of the ability to save the ones you love from death. It was the first time the shadow within Anakin truly looked toward the dark and saw not horror, but hope. Yet even then, the choice was not made. Love is not turned in a single heartbeat. It is bent, strained, and finally broken. The holocron whispers that the Force is not cruel in its tests, but it is relentless. Every vision was another stone upon his heart. Every battle away from her was another chance for fate to strike. And all the while, Padme, the woman in the shadows, felt the change, but could not name it. She saw the fear in his eyes when they were alone. She felt the way his embrace was tighter, more desperate. She heard the unspoken question, "How can I keep you?" Soon, that question would find its answer. But answers have teeth. Chapter 7. The Chancellor's Masked. The holocron opens upon a chamber of warm gold and deep crimson. The windows are tall, the city lights beyond shimmering like a field of distant stars. It is here that the serpent coils, dressed not in armor or darkness, but in silk words and patient smiles. Chancellor Palpatine was the Republic's shepherd in the eyes of the galaxy. But to Anakin Skywalker, he was something far more dangerous. He was a friend. The Jedi offered him discipline. The Council offered him duty. But Palpatine offered him understanding, or the illusion of it, which was enough. The holocron recalls their meetings, softly lit dinners in the Chancellor's private chambers, conversations about history, philosophy, the nature of power, tales of the old Republic, painted not as fables, but as living truths. Each word laid like a stone in the foundation of a bridge Anakin did not yet see being built. The Chancellor spoke as though Anakin's victories in war were personal gifts to the Republic. He flattered without haste, making every acknowledgement feel earned, and in every compliment there was a subtle whisper, "The Jedi do not see you as I do." It was in one such meeting that Palpatine's voice took a turn. He did not speak as a leader to a soldier, but as a confidant to a man weighed down by visions. "I sense something troubles you," the Chancellor said, his tone calm as still water. Anakin hesitated. He had not spoken of the dreams to Obi-Wan. He had not spoken of them to the Council. But the Chancellor was no Jedi, bound by no code that would dismiss his fears as weakness. So Anakin spoke, not fully, not the depth of his terror, but enough. Enough for Palpatine to step closer to the wound. The holocron remembers the subtle shift in the Chancellor's gaze, like a predator scenting blood. "Have you ever heard," Palpatine asked slowly, "the tragedy of Darth Plagueis the Wise?" And the chamber seemed to grow smaller. Palpatine wove the tale in the voice of a storyteller who knew of a dark lord of the Sith, so powerful in the Force he could influence the midichlorians to create life, to keep the ones he cared for from dying. He had such knowledge of the dark side, the Chancellor murmured, that he could even save others from death. But his apprentice killed him in his sleep. Anakin's breath slowed. The words pressed against his heart like cold fingers. "Save others from death." Palpatine watched him carefully, not breaking the silence. Then, the seed planted, he leaned back, his tone light again, as though the story were a harmless myth. The holocron hisses here, for it knows that myths have teeth when told to the desperate. From that day, Anakin's visits to the Chancellor grew more frequent. Palpatine's office became a refuge from the unblinking scrutiny of the Council. Every conversation left a mark, subtle, invisible, but cumulative. The Chancellor never ordered, he suggested. Never demanded, he guided. He did not shove Anakin toward the dark. He merely removed the barriers that would have stopped him from walking there himself. And in the midst of this, the war raged on. Each new battle deepened the chasm between Anakin's ideals and the Council's orders. Each council meeting seemed to bring fresh suspicion. Then came the request that made the rift impossible to ignore. The Jedi asked Anakin to spy on the Chancellor. The holocron speaks this moment in a whisper, for it was the strike that cracked the stone dot to Anakin. It was betrayal. The one man who had always listened to him, trusted him, now marked as an enemy. The one who spoke to him as if his voice mattered, now to be observed like a criminal. He did not refuse the order aloud. But in his heart, a door closed. The dreams of Padme's death grew sharper, more urgent. Every time she touched her belly, their unborn child stirring within the visions surged in his mind. Time was running out, and Palpatine, always patient, began to let the mask slip. Just enough. Hints that the power of Darth Plagueis was not gone. Hints that such knowledge might be found again. Hints that he might know it. The holocron whispers. This was the hook. Not power for its own sake. Not the promise of ruling the galaxy. The promise of saving her. Of rewriting fate. The Jedi spoke of letting go. The Chancellor spoke of holding on. The galaxy might have been deaf to the difference, but to a man who had lost too much already, there was no choice at all. The day would come, and soon, when the Chancellor's mask would fall completely, when the careful whispers would become open revelations, when the serpent would show its fangs. But even before that day, the bond between them had shifted. Palpatine was no longer a political leader in Anakin's eyes. He was a keeper of forbidden truth, a man who could offer what the Jedi would never give. And in the silent corridors of the Force, the dark side stirred, patient, knowing the moment of choice was near. Chapter 8, The Edge of the Blade. The holocron turns its memory to the final days of the Clone War, a time when every breath seemed to draw the galaxy closer to the blade's edge. The Jedi did not yet know it, but the war was not theirs to win. The Republic did not yet understand that the Chancellor they served was the architect of its unraveling, and Anakin Skywalker stood between two masters, neither of whom spoke. The full truth, the outer rim burned. World after world became ash beneath the march of the separatist war machine. The holocron recalls the images in fractured glimpses. Cities hollowed by fire, oceans turned red, the silence of abandoned homes where laughter once lived. The war had stretched into years. It had carved lines into the faces of its generals. It had drained the Republic's coffers, dimmed the spirits of its people. The clone army, bred for obedience, marched without pause, yet even their resolve could not cleanse the corruption. Festering in the Senate, and in the shadows, the Chancellor drew the war tighter. Like a noose, the Jedi Council, sensing the creeping shadow but unable to name its source, became rigid. Their orders grew sharper, their trust more brittle. It was in this climate that they gave Anakin the order that would seal the fracture. Find out what Palpatine is planning. Spy on him. The holocron whispers the wound this made. It was not merely an order, it was a confession. The Jedi who claimed to trust him as the chosen one did not. The Chancellor, who had nurtured his ambitions, did. Obi-Wan delivered the request with his usual measured tone, but Anakin heard only the weight of betrayal. It felt as though his loyalty had become a weapon for others to wield, not a bond, freely given. Meanwhile, Padme's condition was advancing, her presence more luminous to him than ever. Yet her glow was matched only by the darkness of his visions, visions that came now without warning, choking him awake in the night. Her cries, her final breath, the stillness of her body in his arms. The holocron lingers here, letting the image haunt its silence. Anakin spoke less of these visions to anyone save the one who never dismissed them, and the Chancellor's whispers became sharper, more precise. There is a way to prevent it. The Jedi would forbid it, but I will show you. It was during a council session, as Coruscant trembled under the latest separatist strike, that Anakin's position shifted again. Palpatine appointed him as his representative on the council, a gesture dressed as honor. But woven with poison, the council accepted his presence, but denied him the rank of master. The insult burned like a brand. The holocron's voice deepens. Hear, for it knows the Jedi's reasoning, caution, yet to Anakin it was contempt. Proof that the council would never grant him the recognition Palpatine promised was already his by right. The tension became a constant hum in his mind. Every meeting with the Jedi became an interrogation. Every meeting with the Chancellor became a reassurance. The blade was being sharpened on both sides. The war's final gambit approached. Intelligence reached the council that General Grievous, the last great commander of the separatist armies, had been located on the distant world of Utapau. Obi-Wan was dispatched to end the war. Anakin remained on Coruscant by order of the council to watch the Chancellor. The holocron murmurs that this was no accident. Palpatine wanted him close. Every step in the war had been arranged to lead to this narrowing corridor of fate. The days that followed were a suffocating quiet. Without Obi-Wan, without a place in the council's inner circle, Anakin found himself walking the city at night, a restless shadow among the towers. He would return to Padme's apartment, trying to mask the turmoil in his voice. She could feel it, though she could not name it, the distance growing between the man she loved and the war hero the galaxy saw, and always the Chancellor was there. A summons in the late hours, a private conversation about philosophy, about destiny, about powers the Jedi feared. The story of Darth Plagueis resurfaced, now with the edges sharpened. What was once myth was now positioned as possibility. You could learn this power, Palpatine said one evening, his voice low, his eyes locked on Anakin's. Not from a Jedi. The holocron holds its breath here, for it is the turning of the blade. Anakin was not yet ready to leap, but the choice was coiling within him. Each slight from the council pressed him forward. Each whispered promise from Palpatine drew him. Nearer, the galaxy stood on the brink, and so did he. The next move would not come from Anakin, but from the war itself. The Separatists struck at the heart of Coruscant. The Chancellor was captured, and Anakin, the Republic's greatest warrior, would be thrown into the fire once more, where the blade would finally cut. Chapter 9. Captive, above the world. The holocron turns its fractured gaze to the sky above Coruscant, where the war's final snare was set. The battle did not begin in silence. It began with fire. Separatist warships descended upon the capital like a tide of iron and shadow. Their cannons ripped the air, Their droid starfighters swarmed in endless spirals. Above the glittering city, night fell at dawn. In the heart of the chaos, the story was whispered. Chancellor Palpatine had been taken, dragged from the Senate chamber, bound in the grip of General Grievous, and carried into orbit as a prize of war. The holocron lingers on this moment, the image of a captive chancellor, helpless, waiting to be saved. The Jedi responded with desperate swiftness. Masters, knights, and clone commanders scrambled across landing pads and control rooms, sending every available vessel into the storm. But in the center of the Council's decision, one name eclipsed all others: Anakin Skywalker. He would not go alone. Beside him, as always, was Obi-Wan Kenobi. The two of them, bound by years of battle and brotherhood, rose into the burning sky aboard a single starfighter each, two sparks cutting through the inferno. The holocron slows its telling. For the rescue above Coruscant was more than a mission. It was the final tightening of a thread spun in shadow. The droid swarms crashed against them like waves. Buzz droids scuttled across their hulls, tearing into engines, severing control lines. The air was filled with alarms, the flash of blaster fire, the hiss of systems failing. Yet the two Jedi pressed forward, each maneuver a prayer to the Force, each kill a stave against the rising tide. Anakin's fighter moved like a living thing, his hands and mind flowing as one. He was relentless, as though the Chancellor's capture was a wound to his own honor. The holocron hums here, sensing the truth. He was not flying for the Republic. He was flying for a man who promised him salvation. They reached the flagship, the invisible hand, Grievous's personal vessel. Its hull loomed in the void, scarred but unbroken, its hangar bay yawning like the mouth of a beast. They landed amid smoke and alarms, igniting their blades the instant their boots struck the deck. The corridors were a maze of durasteel and war. Machines, super battle droids closed in from every angle. The sound of blasters and the hum of lightsabers became the heartbeat of the ship at last. They reached the observation tower, and there he was, the Chancellor, bound in a durasteel chair, his face a perfect mask of strain and relief. But between them and their prize stood Count Dooku. The holocron's tone deepens, for this was no chance encounter. It was the second act of a ritual begun. Long ago, on Geonosis, the duel began with formality, a clash of red against blue, echoing in the vast chamber. Dooku's movements were precise, the economy of a master duelist. Obi-Wan met him with steady defense, Anakin with furious strikes. The Count's voice was calm even in battle, his taunts like drops of poison. You have fear, you have anger, but you do not use them. The fight shifted quickly. Obi-Wan was hurled aside, slamming into the deck, unconscious. It was now only Anakin and the Sith Lord before him. Here, the holocron whispers slowly, for the moment is carved into the fabric of destiny. Anakin's strikes grew heavier. His guard fell away. He pressed forward, driven not by Jedi discipline, but by something darker. And then, with a final twist of power, he disarmed the Count. His lightsabers crossed at the man's throat. The Chancellor's voice rose, sharp and commanding, "Kill him." Anakin hesitated. It was not the Jedi way. Dooku was beaten. The law was clear. But the Chancellor's words came again, colder, sinking into the marrow. "Do it." And he obeyed. With a single stroke, the Count's head fell, and the deed was done. The holocron does not rush past this moment. It lets the silence stretch, the sound of the head striking the deck, the shallow breath of the Chancellor, the weight of the act settling on Anakin's soul. In that instant, a boundary was crossed. The first killing done in the name of another. The first step down the path that had no return. The rescue became an escape. The flagship buckled under the Republic's assault, flames cutting through its decks. Anakin carried the Chancellor through collapsing corridors, bearing both his unconscious master and the weight of his own choice. The ship tore itself apart in orbit. Half destroyed, it began its fall toward Coruscant. Anakin took the controls, guiding the broken vessel through re-entry, crashing it into the surface in a controlled ruin. They lived. The Chancellor was safe, and the galaxy praised Anakin Skywalker as a hero once more. But the holocron's voice turns to ash here, for in saving the Chancellor, he had delivered himself more fully into the man's grasp, and the blade that had been sharpened for years was now poised at the heart of the Jedi Order. Chapter 10. Shadows. In the temple, the holocron's voice deepens, its tone like a current moving beneath black water. Coruscant's sky had cleared of battle smoke, but the air inside the Jedi Temple was heavier than it had ever been. War was ending, yet no one felt peace. The Senate celebrated the Chancellor's rescue. The streets whispered the name of Anakin Skywalker with awe. And still, in the council chamber, shadows gathered. Obi-Wan was the first to speak of doubt. He did not name Anakin openly. Not yet. Instead, he spoke of the Chancellor's powers, his growing reach, the way his voice now touched every decision in the Senate, and every dispatch in the war. Others followed. Yoda's ears drooped with caution. Mace Windu's eyes were sharp, like blades testing their own edge. The Order could feel it, a hand moving unseen among them, and that hand was closing. Anakin returned to the temple as the hero of the Republic, but he felt none of the old comfort here. The walls seemed colder. The glances of his fellow Jedi lingered a moment too long. Even Obi-Wan's words, warm as they were, carried a strain beneath them. The holocron pauses to whisper. He was not wrong, for the council had begun to speak in secret, and Anakin's name was upon their tongues. The council summoned him. They spoke in their measured voices, as they always did. But there was a tremor beneath the formality. They informed him of a new post. He was to represent the Jedi on the Chancellor's inner council. It was an honor in name only. The truth, spoken in Mace Windu's steady tone, was colder. You will observe the Chancellor. You will report to us on all that he says and does. The holocron lets the words hang, for they were the first seed of betrayal planted in Anakin's heart by the Jedi themselves. He left the chamber with his jaw clenched. The Chancellor had trusted him. The Jedi had used him. Palpatine welcomed him warmly, as a father might greet a favored son. He spoke of his rescue as if it were destiny, and he began to speak softly, carefully, of the Jedi as fallible, as political, as dangerous when threatened. These words did not sound like poison to Anakin. They sounded like truth. The holocron stirs, for here begins the slow weaving of the final net. Palpatine invited him often now. 2 private dinners, 2 quiet walks through the Senate's gardens at night. He spoke of art, of history, of the failures of the Republic and the rigid blindness of the Jedi, and in time, his voice turned to something else, to whispers of a greater truth. One evening, as dusk bled into the Coruscant skyline, tone shifted. He spoke of the Force itself, not as the Jedi taught it, but as something deeper, older, beyond the narrow borders of the Code. He told of a Sith legend of Darth Plagueis, the Wise, who could shape the Force to keep those he loved from dying. He told it not as myth, but as memory. And in Anakin's chest, the old wound flared. The loss of his mother, the dream of losing Padme. The holocron's voice trembles here, for it remembers the taste of that fear, how it can unmake even the strongest vow. Anakin did not yet know he stood between two traps. The Jedi asked him to spy on the Chancellor. The Chancellor asked him to doubt the Jedi, and neither could see that his soul was already leaning toward the voice that promised to save what he loved. The temple at night had changed. In the meditation halls, the air seemed colder. The statues of long-dead masters seemed to watch him differently, their stone eyes heavy with unspoken judgment. He began to avoid the place. He walked in the Senate corridors more often, and when he dreamed not of the temple, but of Padme alone, afraid, fading from his arms as his mother once had. The holocron slows its telling, for it knows that dreams are the most faithful servants of the dark. These were not visions sent by the Jedi, nor were they the pure seeing of the Force. They were shapes conjured from fear, and fear was the river the Chancellor knew best how to navigate. On the morning of the Council's next meeting, the tension became unbreakable. They told Anakin he would not be made a master, despite his new seat. They cloaked the decision in patience and formality. But he heard only insult, humiliation. In that moment, a fracture opened not between him and the Jedi, but within himself. The holocron speaks in a low hum here. A man divided is already lost. Palpatine waited, as all predators do, for the prey to come to him wounded. When Anakin returned, the Chancellor's voice was calm, his eyes patient. He spoke again of Plagueis, of the power to save the ones he loved. And he told him plainly now, only through me will you achieve a power greater than any Jedi. The holocron falls silent for a breath, as if savoring the inevitability. The temple's light was dimming, and a shadow in the shape of a man was already walking toward the place where no dawn could reach. Chapter 11. The Sith revealed. The holocron breathes now, its voice dropping into a tone like stone dragged across stone. There are moments in the galaxy when a mask falls and nothing can be unlearned. This was such a moment. Anakin arrived in the Chancellor's office at dusk. The windows opened to the restless hum of Coruscant's night traffic. The air was heavy with rain scent and electric light. Palpatine was seated, as always, his hands folded with perfect stillness, his smile carrying that strange mixture of warmth and inevitability. They spoke first of politics, the war, the Jedi Council's arrogance, the fragility of peace, and then, slowly, the conversation curved, like a river bending toward an unseen abyss. You know of the Sith, the Chancellor began, his tone absent of judgment, as though he was speaking of some ancient and impartial truth. To there always are, no more, no less. For 1,000 years they have hidden in shadow, watching the Jedi grow fat in their temples. Anakin listened, his mind balancing between the Jedi's warnings and his own buried fascination. Palpatine's voice grew softer. Have you ever considered that the Sith do not seek chaos for its own sake? That they, too, are guided by the Force, but unafraid to use it fully? The holocron leans forward in its telling. For this is the moment the knife was shown. Anakin asked how he could know such things. Palpatine's eyes narrowed just enough to let the truth slip between the shadows. Because I have studied them. Because I am one. The air in the room stilled. Outside, the rumble of Coruscant's traffic seemed to retreat. The words hung like a blade suspended in the space between them. Anakin's breath quickened. The warnings of the council, the unease in the temple, the secrets and the war and the politics. Suddenly, they all pointed to this. You are the Sith Lord we've been searching for. Anakin said, half in accusation, half in disbelief. Palpatine did not flinch. Instead, he smiled, a slow, deliberate curve of the mouth, as though a door, long locked, had finally been opened. The holocron's voice curls like smoke. This was not a confession of weakness, but an offering of power. Palpatine spoke of peace, true peace, secured not by endless Jedi diplomacy, but by the iron will of one who could bend the galaxy to harmony. He spoke of the Sith's mastery of life and death. He spoke of Padme without naming her, promising the power to save those you fear to lose. Anakin's heart was a storm. The code told him this was the enemy. His love told him this was the answer. Fear whispered that the Jedi could not help him. And the Chancellor's words were no longer the hiss of temptation, they were the sound of salvation offered at the edge of the abyss. You know I would never harm the Republic, Palpatine said, his voice wrapped in sincerity like silk. Help me. Together we can end the war and save those you love. The holocron lets the sentence linger, for it knows the weight of the word together. For Anakin had always felt alone, even in the temple, even beside Obi-Wan, even in Padme's arms. Now, for the first time, someone stood before him not as master or commander, but as an equal, or as a mirror. Anakin stood, torn between blade and vow. I will inform the council, he said, though the words tasted uncertain in his mouth. Palpatine did not stop him. He did not plead. He only said, you will discover they are plotting against me, and against you. The holocron hums with satisfaction. The trap was complete. Anakin left, his mind a maze of duty and desire. The temple felt colder than before. When he stood before the council and spoke of the Sith Lord, their eyes lit not with relief, but with calculation. Mace Windu ordered Anakin to remain at the temple while he and others confronted the Chancellor. His voice was stern, his trust withheld, and in that denial, Anakin felt the last tether to the Jedi strain toward breaking. The hollow whispers now, almost tender. In that hour, the galaxy still held two futures. One in which Anakin remained a Jedi, one in which he fell. But already the weight of the dark was pulling harder. Outside, lightning rolled over the city. Rain struck the temple's spires in thin, silver lines. In the Chancellor's office, the Sith waited for the storm to arrive. Chapter 12, The Blade. Falls the holocron's glow deepens, its light now the color of burning embers smothered in ash. The voice grows quieter, as though the memory itself fears to be spoken. There are moments when the galaxy inhales, holding its breath before it changes, forever. This was such a moment. The Chancellor's office lay in shadow, thunder painting the windows with pale flashes. Mace Windu entered with 3 Jedi at his side, their faces carved from stone, their lightsabers humming to life like the voices of judgment itself. Palpatine rose slowly from his chair, robes spilling like oil over the floor. There was no fear. In him, only the faint curve of a smile that spoke of inevitability. You are under arrest, Chancellor Windu said, his voice like granite striking granite. The Senate will decide your fate. The holocron exhales, a sound like old parchment tearing. Palpatine's answer was neither plea nor surrender. It's treason, then. What followed was not battle, but execution. with speed unnatural. For mortal flesh, Palpatine's blade ignited in crimson fire. The room erupted in light and motion. 2 Jedi fell before they could even cry out, their bodies smoking where the red saber passed. The storm outside roared in sympathy. Windu pressed forward, each strike deliberate, each step a pronouncement of final judgment. The last of his allies fell, and still Windu advanced, driving the Sith Lord back toward the great windows. The holocron speaks slowly here, for it remembers every clash of violet and crimson, every hiss of the sabers meeting. Face twisted, his voice rising in a snarl, until suddenly he fell to his knees. The saber was torn from his grasp, and Windu's blade hovered inches from his throat. Anakin was not yet in the room. Not yet, but the galaxy had already begun to tilt in the temple. Anakin's breath came fast, each inhale sharper than the last. He saw the Council's mistrust in his mind's eye. He heard Padme's cries from his dreams. He felt the Chancellor's words coil in his chest like a serpent. Only through me can you save her. And so he ran through the endless corridors of the temple, into the open air, and toward the Senate district, as rain struck his robes and hissed upon the durasteel beneath his boots. The holocron lingers over this next vision, for it is the moment where choice becomes destiny. Anakin burst into the office to find the scene. Frozen, Windu's saber poised to strike. Palpatine crouched and weakened, the storm's light bathing them both in ghostly blue. He's too dangerous to be left alive, Windu said, not looking away from his prey. Anakin's voice trembled. He must stand trial. Windu's eyes narrowed. He controls the Senate and the courts. He is the Sith Lord we have been hunting. He will never be contained. The holocron pauses, its glow pulsing as if the Force itself hesitates to relive what came next. Palpatine's voice was a whisper, yet it filled the chamber. You need me to save her. The words were not for Windu. They were for Anakin alone. The storm outside broke in full, sheets of rain shattering against the glass. And within Anakin, the last fragile wall fell. No, he cried, stepping forward, his blade igniting in desperate light. In one swift motion, he struck, not at Palpatine, but at Windu's arm. The Jedi Master's cry was drowned by thunder as his saber spun away into the dark. Palpatine rose. His hands stretched toward Windu, and from them erupted a torrent of lightning so fierce that the air itself seemed to burn. Windu screamed as the storm devoured him. His body cast into the city's abyss below. Silence followed. A silence, vast a silence, vast enough to fill the galaxy. Anakin stood, breathing hard, his saber dimming in his hand. Palpatine's face was deformed now, scorched and twisted by his own lightning. Yet his eyes burned brighter than before. You are fulfilling your destiny, the Sith Lord said, his voice now the deep hum of an ancient promise. The lets the words drip slowly, like poison into an open wound, kneeling before the new master. Anakin's voice was heavy with the weight of what could not be undone. I will do whatever you ask. Just help me save her. Palpatine's hand rested on his bowed head. Henceforth, you shall be known as Darth Vader. The storm began to fade outside. The galaxy exhaled, but the breath was cold. Chapter 13. The temple burns, the holocron's light is no longer soft. It pulses, sharp and angular, like the heartbeat of a war machine. The voice that speaks now is heavier, drenched in the ashes of 1,000 torches. The rain over Coruscant had not yet stopped when the orders were given. Lightning still clawed across the clouds as the Chancellor's command seeped through the channels of clone battalions across the galaxy. Order 66, 3 words, a sentence without trial. The end of an age. But in the temple, the end would not come by clone blaster alone. It would arrive wearing a Jedi's cloak, beneath which burned a Sith's fire. Darth Vader stood upon the landing platform where Republic gunships waited like hungry beasts. The mask was not yet his. His face still carried the shape of the man he once was. But the shadow wrapped around him now was absolute. Beside him, a column of clone troopers stood ready, their armor slick with rain, their visors reflecting only obedience. March, Vader commanded, and they obeyed without question. The temple gates loomed ahead, ancient stone and durasteel, carved with the histories of the Jedi's long reign. Once Anakin had passed through these gates as a boy, wide-eyed, carrying dreams that could barely fit in his small hands. Now he returned with a blade meant to cut those dreams to pieces. The holocron whispers, as if fearing that even memory of this night is dangerous. Inside, the temple was alive with confusion. Younglings ran through corridors toward the training halls. Masters shouted orders. The hum of lightsabers mingled with the hiss of blaster fire. But then came the sound that unmade hope, the deep, steady footfalls of Vader and his soldiers. Blaster bolts painted the walls in molten streaks. Jedi fell one by one, some in battle stance, others in shock, unable to believe that the one they called Anakin now moved among their executioners. In the archives, the air smelled of ozone and burning parchment. Vader's saber cleaved through the guardians of knowledge, the luminous records of millennia collapsing into shards of crystal and smoke. The galaxy's memory was being erased, line by line, by the very hand that had once sworn to protect it. And then, the younglings, the holocron's voice dims, as though even it hesitates to speak the next vision aloud. In a quiet training room, small faces turned toward the sound of approaching footsteps. Relief bloomed in their eyes. Master Skywalker had come. He would save them. The door slid shut behind him. His saber ignited, blue light filling the dark like the promise of dawn. But dawn did not come that night. Outside the temple, smoke rose into the storm, carrying with it the last prayers of the Jedi who had not fled. Gunships hovered, their cannons silencing any who tried to escape. In distant star systems, Order 66 was carried out with the same merciless precision. On Felucia, Alasecura fell beneath the rifles of her own men. On Mygeet, Cry was lost in the snow and fire. The galaxy was stitched together by 1,000 deaths, each one a thread in the Sith's new tapestry. But it was the temple that bled the most. Its towers, once a beacon to all worlds, now stood like funeral pyres. The great spire where Jedi had studied the stars was lit not by meditation, but by the burning of its own roof. Vader walked among the ruins, his saber dripping with the light of the fallen. There was no tremor in his hands, no falter in his steps. The man who had once hesitated before striking a prisoner now moved like a shadow with no conscience. And yet, beneath the armor of his will, something still stirred, a whisper he could not silence. Padme's face, her breath, shallow in his visions. The promise that all of this was for her. The holocron lingers here, letting the silence stretch like the last note of a funeral song. When at last the fires began to dim, the temple was no longer the heart of the Jedi, it was a mausoleum. And Vader, its final custodian, turned from the ruin and walked into the night. Behind him, The clones loaded bodies into carriers. The smell of scorched stone and flesh clung to the air, settling into the city's breath like an unshakable omen in the depths of Coruscant. The Holyfiends would later speak of a Jedi rebellion. The Senate would hear of necessary action to restore peace, and the people weary from war would believe it. Thus did the Republic end, not with celebration or mourning, but with quiet acceptance, as the galaxy lay down and slept beneath its new chains. The holocron's voice softens, but the words are carved deep into the memory of the Force. That night, the Jedi Order died, and in its place, the Empire was born. Chapter 14. The Birth of the Empire. The holocron's light does not flicker now. It burns with a steady, venomous glow, as if it has reached the part of the story it was built to remember. What comes next is not whispered with grief. It is spoken with a terrible satisfaction. The temple still smoked. Its towers stood black against the rain, like teeth from a corpse not yet buried. But beyond its ruined gates, another theatre was being prepared. The Senate Rotunda, that vast chamber where the galaxy's destiny was sealed in words, where the wills of thousands of worlds had once echoed freely. On this night, it would echo with only one voice. Sheev Palpatine, Chancellor, no longer, his form draped in dark, ceremonial robes, stood at the heart of the chamber. The great platform of the Supreme Chancellor's podium, now his stage. His face was marked by the scars of his own design, the deep folds and sunken eyes that told of Jedi treachery. The senators gasped to see him so disfigured. He did not hide it. He wielded it. Holoprojectors filled the sky above the chamber with images of the temple in flames, of clone battalions bravely reclaiming the city from the traitorous Jedi. Every angle had been chosen to tell a single story, that the Jedi had tried to overthrow the Republic, that only the Chancellor's wisdom and the loyalty of the clones had preserved civilization from collapse. The holocron's voice turns low, twisting each phrase as though mocking the naivety of those who listened that night. Palpatine's speech was a slow tightening of chains. The Jedi Order, he began, has revealed itself as the true enemy of peace. For centuries, they have manipulated our government, poisoned our wars, and plotted to seize power for themselves. Gasps, whispers, a ripple of fear through the endless tears of the Senate. But I assure you, he said, this betrayal has been answered. The treacherous order has been purged, its plots dismantled. And from this day forth, we will ensure that such chaos can never rise again. He raised his arms. The chamber's light seemed to dim, perhaps by design, perhaps by something darker. In order to maintain stability, in order to preserve the security of the people, the Republic will be reorganized into the first galactic empire. The senators erupted, some in applause, some in shock, but the applause swallowed the shock, drowning it in waves of thunderous approval. There were those who hesitated, those whose hearts stuttered at the words, but they were few and they were quiet. In the shadow of war, freedom had grown tired, and tyranny had learned to speak in its language. Above it all, Palpatine's eyes gleamed like the edge of a blade. To most, they shone with resolve. To a few, they burned with something else entirely, a hunger without end. And in the shadows, at the base of the platform, Darth Vader stood, his hood drawn low, his gaze scanning the tiers of the Senate like a predator counting its prey. He was a symbol, a silent sentinel of the new order. No one dared speak his name. Most still believed him to be the Jedi Knight Anakin Skywalker, a hero returned from battle, now a loyal enforcer of the Emperor's will. Only a handful knew the truth. Fewer still understood its cost. The holocron lingers here, describing how swiftly the galaxy bent its knee. Worlds that had fought each other for decades now sent their fleets to the Emperor in loyalty. Trade guilds pledged resources. Holonet works broadcast new propaganda reels before dawn. Every planet's children learned the same anthem by nightfall, and in the hidden corridors of the galaxy, the hunt began. Vader's shadow stretched far beyond Coruscant. Jedi fugitives were marked and hunted without rest. Clone officers received sealed directives to search not only the cities and forests, but the minds of those they questioned. Fear became the Empire's first language. On Kessel, the spice mines overflowed with political prisoners. On Rax's separatist leaders were paraded through the streets before execution. On Mandalore, Imperial garrisons replaced the last of the neutral banners. Each act was framed as peacekeeping, but in truth, it was the tightening of a fist around the galaxy's throat. And yet, the Emperor moved with patience. He did not abolish the Senate entirely, not yet. He allowed it to stand, its debates now toothless, its votes preordained. It was a stage to legitimize his decrees, a veil to keep the masses dreaming that their voices still mattered. The holocron's tone darkens to a whisper, but every empire hungers. And the Emperor's hunger was endless. He turned to the outer rim, to the unknown reaches, to the forgotten archives of the Jedi, now under lock in the Imperial Palace. Every scrap of lore, every chart, every half-remembered legend of ancient powers was his to command. Vader became his blade and his apprentice. And though the galaxy believed the Jedi extinct, the truth was that some still lived. Scattered, hunted. They were embers the Emperor intended to stamp out before they could spark. Above the capital, the night sky burned with the glow of construction. New fleets, new weapons, new prisons. The machinery of the Empire never slept, and, as the holocron's light pulses one last time, its voice closes the chapter with a single truth. The birth of the Empire was not a coronation. It was the sound of a galaxy forgetting how to breathe. Chapter 15. The Purge of the Survivors. The holocron breathes before it speaks, as though this part of the tale weighs even on its crystal heart. The glow softens, but the words strike like cold steel. The Jedi were not gone. Not yet. Scattered across the stars, a few survived the fire. Some fled to deep space, others hid in the slums of strange worlds. Some clung to half-ruined temples, hoping the Force itself might shield them. They were wrong. The Emperor's will was clear. None must remain. And so the hunt began. Not a war, not a battle, a silent, relentless purge. Darth Vader moved first. His orders were sealed, his targets whispered into his ear alone. Clone commanders, now wearing the new white and black sigils of the Empire, received deployment codes that carried no public record. Troops left garrisons in the dead of night, their transports vanishing into hyperspace without a trace. The holocron's voice lists them like a funeral dirge on Lothal. A knight named Corvin Saris hid among the farmers, using his gifts to heal the sick and bless the soil. He was found by a single TIE transport, his lightsaber cast into the dust beside his body. On Dantwan, a Padawan, barely grown, sought shelter with an old friend of her master. The friend betrayed her for a shipment of grain. Vader himself arrived to take her saber. On Felucia, the jungle swallowed a council member. For months, the clones lost his trail, until Vader burned half the continent to smoke, flushing him into the open. But not all died quickly. Some fought, some vanished beyond the reach of maps. A few slipped between the cracks of fate itself. The Emperor feared none of these, save one. The holocron hesitates here, its voice lowering to something almost reverent. There was a Jedi who carried not only a lightsaber, but the knowledge of ancient force rites long forbidden. He had walked in the shadows of the galaxy's forgotten temples. His name is not spoken here, but the holocron hints that his escape was the ember that might have rekindled the Order had the fates been different. Vader pursued him personally for months. Their final meeting is not recorded, only that Vader returned alone, and the Emperor smiled when told the hunt was finished. But the purge was not only waged with soldiers. Fear itself became the Empire's greatest weapon. Worlds were rewarded for denouncing any Jedi seen in their cities. Families were promised safety if they surrendered those they sheltered. In the Outer Rim, Imperial Inquisitors, dark agents trained to hunt Force sensitives, joined the search. Some were fallen Jedi themselves, bent and reshaped into the Emperor's tools. The holocron speaks now as though it walks through these shadows on Ryloth. A single rumor of a Jedi was enough to see entire villages burned. On Corellia, Imperial patrols swept through the shipyards with sensor drones, searching for the faintest trace of kyber crystals. On Nar Shaddaa, bounty hunters traded hollers of Jedi faces like currency in the neon dark. Every purge has its echo. The more the Jedi were hunted, the more whispers of them grew into myth. Some worlds began to doubt the Emperor's story. Why would a dead enemy require such relentless chasing? But doubt was dangerous. To speak of the Jedi with respect was to invite a charge of sedition, and sedition often ended with the accused vanishing into the prisons of the Maw. Vader himself changed during these years. The holocron describes him not as a man, but as a storm that learned patience. At first, he hunted with rage, striking down his prey in the open, leaving bodies where they fell. But as the purge stretched on, his method sharpened. He began to wait, to let his targets feel safe before he struck. Jedi who thought themselves hidden for years would wake to find the shadow of his presence already in the room. There are stories, perhaps true, perhaps not, that he sometimes spared the very young. Force-sensitive children who could not yet fight were taken alive. Some vanished into the Emperor's secret projects. Others were not spoken of again. The final years of the Purge were not marked by great battles, but by silence. The last fugitive masters spoke less and less through the Force, afraid that even a whisper might be traced. Lightsabers were dismantled, kyber crystals hidden or destroyed. The Jedi Code was no longer spoken aloud. Even the word Jedi became a curse, and then, one day, the hunt was simply over. There were no more names on the lists. The Inquisitors returned with empty hands. Vader's travels grew fewer. The galaxy, once rich with the hum of 1,000 sabers, was quiet. The holocron does not rejoice at this. Its voice sounds older now, as though each name it recalled was a stone placed upon its spirit. It closes with a truth the Emperor never feared to hear, but always worked to bury. The Jedi were gone, but the Force was not. It flowed still, in every world, in every living thing. And where it flows, the seeds of rebellion can never truly die. Chapter 16. Vader's Chains. The holocron opens slowly this time, as though what it is about to reveal is not meant for many ears. Its glow shifts from blood red to the deep, cold black of a dying star. You have heard the tale of his rise. and of the purge that swept the galaxy clean of his former brethren. But power, even in the hands of a Sith, is never free. It is bought, it is kept. It is paid for in obedience, and no chains are heavier than the ones that bind a servant to his master. Vader wore such chains, not of iron, but of the will of Darth Sidious. The Emperor understood him better than any. He knew what Vader feared to lose, and what he could not bear to face. He knew the shadow of Anakin Skywalker still lingered in the black-armored form, and that to rule the monster, he must torment the man. The holocron whispers the first truth: Vader's life support suit was no gift, it was a prison, the armor kept him alive, but it was made of parts both crude and cruel. Its systems could be repaired only with the Empire's blessing. Its servos were slower than they might have been. Its interface delivered constant pain, not as a flaw, but as design. Even the lenses of his mask were tuned to dim the world, keeping him always in shadow. The Emperor told him this was necessity, that his burns and injuries required such limits to function. But the holocron knows better. It was control, to ensure that no matter how powerful Vader became, he would always need his master's machines to survive. And there were other chains, invisible but no less binding. Sidious sent him on endless missions that pulled him away from the center of Imperial power. Whenever Vader's thoughts turned inward to ambition, to betrayal, he was dispatched to some distant frontier to crush a rebellion or hunt a rumor of a Jedi. The holocron hisses here, as if in contempt. It is the way of the Sith, to keep one's apprentice hungry, but never fed enough to grow fat with rebellion. Yet hunger breeds more than loyalty. It breeds obsession. Vader became obsessed with unlocking the secrets the Emperor refused to share. He studied ancient Sith tombs, holocrons lost to the Jedi Purge, artifacts dredged from the ruins of forgotten empires. Each held a fragment of truth, but none the whole. When he asked Sidious directly about the powers whispered in Sith legend, to heal the dying, to raise the dead, the Emperor would laugh softly and say such things were beyond even his reach. Then he would turn away, leaving Vader to wonder if the laughter was truth or mockery. Still, Vader served. He obeyed orders without question, for he knew rebellion without readiness was suicide. He was patient, but the holocron knows patience can also be a shackle. Sometimes the Emperor's control was far more direct. Sidious could command the Force itself to pierce Vader's mind like a blade. When displeased, he could collapse the Dark Lord to his knees with but a thought, and Vader would rise again, silent, bowing his head. The holocron's voice cracks here, not with sorrow, but with something like shame. He had become the Emperor's enforcer, but not his equal. And deep within, the echo of Anakin Skywalker knew the truth of this servitude. Yet chains are not only made by the hands of others. Some are forged by the prisoner himself. Vader still carried his own chains of guilt for the slaughter of the Jedi younglings, chains of loss for the wife he could not save, chains of rage for the man he once was. These he never sought to break, for in them he found the fuel for his power. To let them go would be to face the possibility that he had destroyed his life for nothing. But the Emperor was not content to let Vader's pain serve only Vader. From time to time, Sidious would place before him a test, a chance to prove his loyalty through acts so vile that no path back to light could remain. The holocron speaks of one such act, known to few, on a nameless moon in the mid-rim. A small enclave of Force-sensitive refugees was found. Not Jedi, not Sith, just a people who lived in communion with the Force. They welcomed Vader, believing him a guardian sent to protect them. Sidious ordered their eradication, and so, in the burning night, Vader did as commanded, not because he wanted to, but because to refuse would be to admit that Sidious could be defied. When it was over, he returned to Coruscant. The Emperor said nothing, but the chains grew heavier. Years passed like this. Vader, the right hand of the Empire, feared by billions, yet never free, and somewhere, in the cold void behind his mask, a question began to take root. A question he dared not voice. If the chains of the apprentice are so tight, what chains bind the master? The holocron hums low, a warning in the dark. That question, once asked, can never be forgotten. Chapter 17. Shadows of Rebellion. The holocron opens. With a flicker, its voice a low whisper, like a storm felt in the bones before it touches the air. Even the strongest fortress will crumble if its stones remember they were once free. For years, the galaxy lay under the iron shadow of the Empire. Worlds bent their knees. Voices of dissent fell silent, snuffed out before their words became fire. Yet silence does not mean peace. It means breath held, waiting for the right moment to exhale in the cracks between Imperial patrol routes. In the dim corners of starports and the forgotten backwaters of the Outer Rim, seeds began to stir. Not many at first, merchants robbed of their livelihoods, pilots stripped of their ships, farmers taxed into ruin. These were not warriors, but pain teaches quickly, and the galaxy was a willing student. The first sparks were small, a convoy of Imperial supplies, lost to pirates whose names no one could recall. A transmission station sabotaged on a remote moon, its distress calls swallowed by static. The Emperor dismissed them as nothing, friction in the gears of his vast machine. But Vader knew better. He could feel it. The Force itself began to shift, its currents rippling with defiance. It was not the focused strike of the Jedi, but a restless, growing tide. Vader hunted these sparks with relentless precision. Each time he found them, he crushed them utterly. Cities burned, entire families vanished in the night. And yet, for every spark he extinguished, two more seemed to ignite elsewhere. The holocron's voice softens, not in mercy, but in curiosity. Rebellion is a creature of many heads. Cut one, and the others only bare their teeth more fiercely. Among the earliest there were whispers of something greater, a network of scattered cells beginning to speak as one. Smugglers in Corellia, freedom fighters on Onderon, deserters from the Imperial Navy, each alone a nuisance, together a threat. But the Emperor was patient. He allowed the unrest to grow. Like bait left to draw out larger prey, Sidious believed he could bend this rising defiance into a weapon. If the rebellion could be lured into the open, he would crush it in one terrible blow, ensuring the galaxy's submission for a generation more. Vader's role was simple: to be the shadow that fell over any world that dared to rise. Yet there was something in this unrest that gnawed at him. On one mission, he tracked a rebel cell to a frozen moon orbiting a dead star. They were poorly armed, their defenses little more than scavenged blasters and makeshift barricades. Yet when he breached their last shelter, none fled. They stood together, fear in their eyes, but resolve in their stance. One of them, a woman, with frost in her hair and blood on her hands, spoke to him as if to an equal. "You cannot kill all of us," she said. "Even if you could, the idea has already escaped you." Vader cut her down, but her words stayed. He began to sense something. Dangerous not to the Empire, but to himself. In their defiance, he felt echoes of a time when he too had fought for something larger than himself. The holocron lets the thought linger, its silence accusing. Memory is the sharpest blade. It cuts both ways. The Emperor saw the growing unrest, not as danger, but opportunity. From the shadows of Coruscant, he began weaving traps. False intelligence leaked. Imperial fleets shifted position in ways that would draw rebel forces into vulnerable ground. Yet rebellion is chaos, and chaos does not march neatly into the snares of the patient hunter. It was around this time that rumors began to spread, not just of rebellion, but of hope. A single word began appearing, whispered from lips that trembled yet dared to speak it: alliance. The holocron's tone lowers, nearly lost beneath its own hum. Hope is not a gentle light, it is fire, and fire, when starved, becomes hunger itself. For the first time, Imperial agents found themselves hunted. Ships vanished into hyperspace without trace. Weapons caches went missing from secure vaults. Even deep within the core worlds, rebellion's hand reached unseen. Vader, sent to extinguish it again and again, grew restless, not because he feared their strength, but because he could not yet see their heart. He knew such movements were never faceless for long. Somewhere, someone was shaping this tide, and then came whispers of a name from the ashes of a battle on Raltier, a name the holocron refuses to speak aloud, letting it coil in the mind instead. A survivor, a leader, a light the Emperor would soon turn all his darkness toward snuffing out. But the galaxy does not wait for permission to change. What began as sparks had become embers, and soon those embers would burn into the open. The holocron's glow deepens, as though leaning closer to the listener. The apprentice watched, the master plotted, and far away, in places neither yet saw clearly, destiny moved its unseen hand. Chapter 18. The Son of Skywalker. The holocron hums. Its light now a deep, molten red, as if recalling a wound that never healed. Even the most bound servant of darkness can be undone by a single name. The Emperor's reach had stretched across the stars for nearly 2 decades. His apprentice, Darth Vader, was the edge of that reach. A blade swung without hesitation, without mercy, until the day the blade hesitated. It began as a report, buried among the endless streams of intelligence that passed across the Emperor's desk. An Imperial outpost destroyed, stormtroopers slain, plans for a terrible weapon stolen by the rebellion. The Death Star, the Emperor's ultimate instrument of fear, had been wounded before it was even complete. Vader was sent to reclaim what had been taken. It was, at first, a mission like any other: hunt the thieves, crush the dissent, return what was stolen. But this time, the currents of the Force whispered differently. There was a presence, faint but sharp, like the first glint of a blade beneath a shroud. On the desert world of Tatooine, the threads began to twist. Imperial spies reported the droids carrying the stolen plans had fallen into the hands of a young moisture farmer. The holocron pauses, its voice drawn thin with tension. A boy. In the place where the man once was, the name given was Luke. Skywalker. Skywalker. The syllables cut through the armor of Darth Vader's mind. They did not belong in this time, in this life. They were relics of a man who had died on the banks of Mustafar's rivers of fire. Vader told himself it was coincidence. The galaxy was vast, names repeated, yet the Force does not whisper without reason. The boy fled with the stolen plans. The hunt moved to the Death Star, and in those metal halls, the trap was sprung. Vader felt it before he saw it, the raw, unshaped strength of the Force. He faced the boy only briefly. In the chaos of a battle in the trench above Yavin, their ships danced between fire and shadow. The boy's hand was guided, not by training, but by something older, deeper. The Death Star burned. The boy lived Vader, spinning away into the void. Knew the truth before the Emperor spoke it. When they met again in the Emperor's throne room, Sidious's eyes gleamed with something more than malice. He had news. The Force is strong with him. The son of Skywalker must not become a Jedi. The holocron's voice lowers, as though fearful the truth might still be overheard. Vader said nothing, but within him something long sealed began to stir. It was impossible, and yet not. He thought of Padma's last breath, of her whispered belief that there was still good in him. He had crushed that hope. Or so he thought. If the boy was truly his, then part of him had escaped Mustafa's flames. Vader hunted the boy with a hunger unlike any he had felt since his earliest days as the Emperor's apprentice, not merely to destroy him, but to claim him in his mind. Visions bloomed of father and son, side by side, ruling the galaxy not as master and servant, but as equals, as destiny fulfilled, twisted to his own design. Yet the Emperor's intentions were different. Sidious wished to mold the boy into a new apprentice, one unbroken by loss. The holocron hums with ancient amusement, the master and the apprentice, each reaching for the same prize. On Bespin, Vader's hunt reached its crescendo. Through smoke and steel, he drove the boy back, testing his strength, measuring the depth of his resolve. When the time came, Vader did not kill him. Instead, he gave him the truth. I am your father. The words were a blade and a lifeline. The boy recoiled, choosing to fall into the abyss rather than take his father's hand. But Vader knew, once a truth is spoken, it cannot be unmade. The boy would think of him, he would dream of him, and in those dreams the seed would grow. The Emperor, furious but cautious, allowed Vader to continue the hunt. He believed Vader would deliver the boy to him in the end. Perhaps he would have. Had the boy not done the unthinkable, he returned not as a hunted child, but as a Jedi Knight. When they met again, on the forest moon of Endor, Vader felt something shift within him. The boy's blade was steady. His gaze did not flinch, and yet, beneath that strength, there was mercy. The holocron's voice trembles, not with fear, but with the slow cracking of stone around a buried truth. He spoke to me, as if I could still be saved. The Emperor sought to break the boy before his father's eyes, to bend his will, to turn his anger into chains. But in the end, it was not the Emperor who broke someone. It was the boy who broke the shadow around his father's heart. In that final moment, Vader made a choice, not born of fear nor ambition, but love, a word he had not dared to speak in decades. The Emperor fell, the Sith were undone, and Anakin Skywalker returned. The holocron dims, its voice fading like a breath given back to the stars. The prophecy was not a weapon. It was a wound, and only in its fulfillment could the galaxy bleed into healing. The light dies, the memory sleeps, but the name remains.